Welcome back to another episode of the Hall of Sports podcast. Today I'm joined by John Jurkovic, or as many Chicago Bears fans know as Jurko on ESPN 1000. How are you doing today, Jurko?
I'm doing exceptional. Thanks. Just had a 2-hour power hour where we're talking about Carson Wentz and whether it'd be worth drafting Carson Wentz or trading for Carson Wentz or not from the Philadelphia Eagles. And so we've had a bunch of feedback and a lot of back and forth going on that. And I think ultimately we'll just stay away from Carson Wentz for a while.
Would you stay away based on kind of what he's shown the last kind of year or two, or is it to do with the cap hit? Because I know we started off the first, 2 or 40 games, I think it was, where I think he threw 4 touchdowns for every 1 interception. So What do you think has changed with Carson Wentz over the last couple of years? Is it just that ACL injury that he had before that Eagles Super Bowl run, or is there anything else that you think has changed?
Yeah, he's thrown 81 touchdowns and 21 interceptions in those first 40 games, and he looked exceptional for 40 games. I don't think it's just the injury, because if it was just the injury, then he would have struggled right away. I think there's a number of different factors with those guys, with the Eagles, including talent, including offensive line talent, including injuries. Probably including a playbook that may have stagnated a little bit and hasn't been as adventuresome as it once was. And sometimes that happens. You know, Doug Peterson I played with in Green Bay. So I've known Doug. I was a teammate of his. And when you come in, everything's new and fresh. Everything's exciting. Then all of a sudden you struggle a little bit, and then you start looking around and you get kind of stuck in a little bit of a rut. So there's a number of different factors. It doesn't all have to do just with Carson Wentz. But yeah, it could be even Carson Wentz. You know, Chuck Knobloch played for the Yankees and could make a throw from second base to first like it was nothing. Then all of a sudden one day he couldn't make the throw. So I think there's a little mental thing going on too with Carson Wentz that maybe a change of address and a change of venue might help too.
Yeah, it's an interesting one where you say it's kind of the lack of talent or the offensive line, and we've seen a lot of that in Chicago with the Bears, where we've seen the offensive line be terrible for quite a number of years. Like, I think you're one of the main people that's kind of spoken out about Charles Leno, and I've been the same. I've not liked him at left tackle for many, many years, and many people have said he's been doing all right, but again, he even on run plays, if there's one offensive lineman that you don't see engaged with a defensive lineman, it tends to be Charles Leno for me. What have you seen any changes, or even last week in that for the performance for the offensive line? Did anybody kind of stick out to you where you can see past this year that you'd even like to keep them around?
So I look at Leno as a chance to upgrade, and then they moved Fetty out to right tackle. But even before that, Bobby Massey, I thought, had gotten a little bit old and wasn't really capable of playing at a top level of football anymore. I like the guys on the interior, the mix that they have, even with some of these new guys that are coming in. But remember, you're only keeping 10 offensive linemen anyway. You have to upgrade both tackles. Mustipher, Whitehair, James Daniels, when he comes back from injury. I thought he was playing a little bit better this year, and then you go and get hurt. And so that's going to be a problem as you move forward. I like the mix they have on the inside, including the backups with a healthy James Daniels and with Mustipher. So I think they're all right in the middle. You're not going to add in the middle. I think what you have to add, though, is a premier tackles. You got to get some top flight tackles, whether it's free agency or whether you address it in the top 15 picks in the draft. And I think that's where the Bears are going to be picking, somewhere between 7 and 15, depending upon how the rest of the season goes. So I think you're going to have to find yourself a tackle at that point. And, I think the guys in the middle are all right, because you can't make wholesale changes over the course of one off season. Address the tackle position first. And then after that, we can go ahead and we can take a look at it. You know, and you still got to find a quarterback. When you have 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. So quarterback, no matter what you do, you're going to have to come back and address.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I always say that as well. As if you're looking for one position and you have multiple guys there, it really means that you don't have the kind of bona fide starter. It kind of goes with most sports. Like, a lot of the talk that we'd be doing as well is kind of on European soccer, and I know you're a big fan of Spurs. Yeah. And generally, if if it's, for example, I used Chelsea as an example before, is they had so many players come in as their goalkeeper, which really meant they didn't have a goalkeeper.
Right.
I'd say you're pretty happy with the start of this season anyway for Spurs. They've been doing very, very well. But
I watched both Tottenham and I watched Chelsea too. I started watching Tottenham when Luka Modric was there in like 2008.
Yeah.
When Harry Redknapp finally took over in the middle of the season, and Harry put Modric in there and put him in the midfield and just let him be his guy. And then you guys got Kovacic over at Chelsea now. So I watched Mateo play too. So anytime I get some Champions League football, here I got to watch Champions League football in Spanish, unfortunately, because that's where it's offered up. But like yesterday, I watched Champions League. I'll be watching some Champions League today. But yeah, I like watching the EPL. It's in the morning. It's Saturday and Sunday here. And then it's before I really kind of warm up watching that so I can watch NFL football because it kind of coincides during the fall.
Yeah, no, it's good to be able to kind of compare them. There is some of the same kind of things that happen, especially when building a team. And you talk about, and I think it's one of the things that comes about, and we're talking about now with the Bears, is that how are they going to be able to rebuild some of this roster where you're seeing most likely at the end of the season, the coach is probably going to be gone. You'd be hoping that the GM would be gone as well.
Yes.
But the problem is, and we see this in kind of European soccer a lot, is you can keep changing coaches, you can keep changing general managers, but it still hasn't changed anything, especially for the Bears, where we've seen how many general managers and how many coaches over the past decade or 2 decades now, and it hasn't really changed anything long term. So what do you think the organization needs to do internally to kind of look at how are they actually going to go about and change this and not just kind of go through the same motion over and over again?
Well, I mean, if you take a look at it, what really has to happen, and let's go to the EPL, Manchester City really wasn't doing anything until Abramovich took over, right?
I think it was one of the Saudis, yeah.
Oh, was it Saudis? Roman took over who?
Chelsea.
Okay, so he took over Chelsea and started investing a lot of money in there. One of the Saudis came in and bought Manchester City and got them back up to where they needed to be. Sometimes you got to sell the team. I think new ownership for the Chicago Bears would be the best thing. New ownership. If the McCaskies would sell, you got some new blood, fresh blood, some people that know a little bit more about football than what the McCaskies do. The McCaskies were not Hallises. George Halas and Muggsy Halas were football people. The other side of that was where the McCaskies came from. Business people. Ivy Leaguers, nothing wrong with that. Just there's no football blood there. And without the football blood in there, I don't know if it necessarily translates into bringing championships about the business. I don't know if they're ever going to sell. For me, the number one answer would be to sell and have a different group and a different ownership group bring in football people, and then there's a real chance for change. That's what I believe. I don't think that's going to happen. So in lieu of that, you've got to find people. I would steal somebody from the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers have done it right for such a long time. I would go into that front office and I would find somebody to come on over and say, hey, help fix us what we've got going on. I know Les Snead down in Los Angeles. He's the general manager out there. He's done a good job of building that program. He's a wheeler and a dealer. He likes guys, does it. Jalen Ramsey comes in. He's more than willing to say thank you, goodbye, and hey, I'm going to find a way to get this guy in here to make special things happen for us. I know John Schneider up in Seattle. I think John Schneider does one hell of a job up in Seattle. They've been exceptionally good for a long period of time, and he's got a good relationship. Remember the Legion of Boom? They had a little bit of a hiccup, but now they're back in the playoffs doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing all the time. So, he had to make tough decisions there. He had to say goodbye to a lot of people there. That defense wasn't happy. He realized the quarterback ultimately is the most important player to have on a team and to keep that quarterback happy. So he had to go into a little bit of a transition. That transition took a little bit of a time. Not everybody was happy with what was happening and what was going on, but ultimately they still find themselves back into the playoffs with Pete Carroll as a head coach. So there are certain areas that you might be able to go to, and if you're not going to get the big guy, get one of his lieutenants and have one of his lieutenants come on over here and be your man.
Yeah, it's an interesting one when you're talking about changing ownership, because as you see a lot in American sports anyway, it doesn't happen too much where, because of how highly valued a lot of these franchises are now, that the owners don't want to let go. We saw a change happen with the Chicago Bulls where fans became basically apathetic
Yep.
in terms of their team. How much longer do you think that's gonna, if we continue the way we are with the Bears, that's gonna start to creep in? Because we've seen it happen with the Bulls, where before, during even when Derrick Rose was there, I think every single night in the United Center it was packed, and then the last couple of years you've started to see the change, and then this past during the pandemic, we've seen the big changes happen there. Do you think anything like that needs to happen for real change to happen for the Bears? Or is it just going to have to be when they make this GM change or the coaching change, they get lucky and they pick the right guy and they pick the right coach? And then, because look, in football is not like the other sports where you can kind of rebuild on the fly and do very well. We've seen it in Miami this year where everyone was convinced at the end of last season that they were just going to tank for Tua, but we've actually seen them improve very, very quickly. And it's been one of those kind of surprising teams that have actually played very good football this season.
Yeah. Because of COVID and no fan reaction in the stands, I really think if they lost that game, you would have heard a lot coming from the fans. It would have been going upstairs. It would have been at Virginia McCaskey. They would have been going at her. But because there's no fans in the stands, I don't know if you really get that same oomph and that same impact, because she's usually at the game and she sees and hears what the fans are not saying. So because of COVID, I don't know if that same impact is. I say change ownership, knowing that there's probably a 0 to 1% chance that it's ever going to happen. But I think that's what needs to happen for this team, really, to kind of get moved into a direction where they're going to be able to have a level of excellence on a consistent basis. It would come with an ownership change. They're trying to get lucky by hiring somebody, and hopefully they hit the right guy eventually. They hit the right guy with Jerry Angelo for a while, and then they got Lovie Smith. So they did that, but that coincided with Urlacher. It coincided with Peanut Tillman, with Lance Briggs. It coincided with getting Blake Brockemeyer from the Carolina Panthers and bringing Ted Washington in and Keith Traylor from other teams. You know, there were a combination of things that started to happen. You stirred the pot, you mixed it all together, and the next thing you know, you had yourself a solid team. And when the D-line got old, they replaced him with Tommy Harris, Tank Johnson. You had Hunter Hillenmeyer. You had guys that were kind of mixing in and out. You were finding guys here and there, and they became decent pieces of what you had going on defensively. So, and then you get a Musa Muhammad. It was just a combination of different things. You add, you subtract, and now you put a team together. But the Bears have never been able to do it on a consistent basis, where they go to the playoffs, 4 out of 5 years or 5 out of 6 years. They just haven't been able to do it, and they can't find a quarterback for the life of them.
And that's probably the reason why. When you don't have a quarterback, you don't get to the playoffs year after year after year. Yep. We've seen it with up in Green Bay as you compare kind of the overall roster in the last 10, 15 years. Without the quarterback, you look at the roster and you're like, you've seen it when Rodgers has gone down in the past, they've struggled massively. But then because they have Rodgers, because they had Brett Favre, it's just been completely different. So I think that, like you said, that's the biggest issue for the Bears. They just can't figure out a way to get even just an above average quarterback to be in the team, because how many times we've seen the quarterback position be the reason why they lose games.
Oh, yeah. I've seen it too many times over too many years. I was part of the Brett Favre thing when he first came in and took over against the Cincinnati Bengals and threw the pass to Kittrick Taylor down the right sideline. That was the infancy of it. I saw him struggle for a couple of years, but he struggled for a couple of years and we're finishing 9-7. You're still making the playoffs, First year he played with us, he didn't make the playoffs. The second, third, and fourth year, we made the playoffs. I left. But, yeah, they basically had 2 quarterbacks for the last 28, 29 years. It's nice to be able to, have a team where you know exactly who your quarterback's going to be and who's not going to be. They had a chance. And for one reason or another, the general manager identified Mitch Trubisky as his guy and ignored other quarterbacks at the time and decided the one quarterback in that draft was truly special was Mitch Trubisky. Here we are 4 years later, and obviously that was false. And that's the kind of thing that gets you to lose a job. You lose your job when you make a catastrophic mistake like that. When you move from number 3, number 2, you trade away draft equity, and you make a catastrophic mistake that will put this football team back, another 3-4 years. You can't forgive a guy for that. At that point, he's got to be fired. And this coach you brought in to be an offensive genius has got a team that's ranked 8th, 29th, 30th. You got to go too. You're not doing it. Whatever you thought you were going to, whatever you sold them on, it's not happening here. And I think it's just got to do with play calling and inability to play call. I can look at a sheet and just call plays that are on the sheet. But there's something to being able to put a game plan together. It's like a conductor in a symphony. He's going to the woodwinds. He's going to the strings. He's going to the brass, and he's going to the percussion. If he's doing it the wrong way, it sounds like crap. If he's doing it the right way, it sounds harmonious and angelic. And I think this guy, when he starts picking out his plays, it's just willy-nilly and there's really no rhyme or reason to what he's doing or why he's doing it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Look, I think when you have a GM that made that mistake before, really, I think that's when I think they should have been gone. I don't think Pay should have been here as long as he was. But yeah, in terms of the way the season's gone now, as a player, how do you see the players reacting towards an end of a season that really it's a big problem because there's not much of a chance for them to win many more games because the way they've been playing, really. So what's that like as a player when the season's kind of fading away?
This was the most important game, and I'll tell you why. This was an important game because if you win this game, you play Houston, and you've got Jacksonville on the schedule. Okay, you finish with Green Bay. They have 4 games left. If you finish this one, you're back at 500. With 2 games, you can win, and you only got to win one of the final 2. Say you're not going to beat Green Bay. You had a chance to run 4 in a row off and put yourself in a situation where you might have qualified for the playoffs. When you have a 10-point lead with 4 minutes and 33 seconds left, and you find a way to lose it, it's up to the players to get themselves out of the funk. They've got to get themselves out of the funk. They put themselves in this situation. They've got to drag themselves out of this situation. And they were doing it. Offense played well. Defense only gave up 20 points. It looked like that's exactly what was going to happen, what they were doing. And then the defense gives up a 96-yard drive. Now, if you look at football statistics and you ask yourself, what's the improbability of giving up a 96-yard drive in that situation? There's probably a 8% chance to score a touchdown from there. 8 out of 100. Okay, 1 out of 12. That's the chance you have to score a touchdown from there. And the Bears made it look easy. It wasn't difficult. And then the last 2 plays were big gainers. And the last play was a 30-some-odd yard touchdown. And there you go. And now you got to, okay, you can't count on the defense. The offense gets the ball back. You got a 3-point lead. All you have to do is run the clock out. You don't. They force a fumble. They get it. They put it in the end zone. Now you get the ball back. You're going to move it. You're going to move it. They're moving the ball. 4th and 1. You don't get the first down because Allen Robinson has a brain fart and doesn't realize where the first down marker is. He doesn't get it. He gets out of bounds. 4th and 1, you go for a run of the ball with 1 timeout left. You never take a shot into the end zone. You've never done anything. The Bears are just good enough to find a way to lose. And that's their problem. They'll find ways to lose instead of creating opportunities for themselves to win. And they had it. All they had to do was execute. And they piddled it down their pant leg, and that's why they're 5-7 right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Does that remind you of any time during your career that there was a season that you knew was pretty much over and there was still games left? And how did you guys as a team deal with that?
Yeah, I had 2 bad seasons in my career. 1991, I was with the Green Bay Packers. I was on the practice squad. Lindy Infante was our coach. And we weren't winning games. Don Mikowski was hurt. We had Blair Keel and Anthony Dilweg and Mike Tomczak as our quarterbacks. And we were competitive in games, but we just weren't good enough to go ahead and win. I think we finished 4-12. They fired Tom Bratz with about 6 games left, and they brought Ron Wolf on. So once they brought Ron Wolf on, in essence, it was a dead coach walking. We knew Lindy Infante wasn't going to stay. We knew Lindy Infante wasn't going to be the coach. So you knew it was bad then. Then you kind of see the guys. I wasn't playing yet at the time, but you can see the guys kind of cashing it in, making sure that they did what they were supposed to do, make sure they did their responsibilities, make sure they gave great effort. But it wasn't necessarily everybody pulling on the same side of the rope to find a way to win a game. It wasn't that. So I've been there, and then in Cleveland in '99, we were just awful. We just had a bad team. Tim Couch was young. We were new. We were coming back. We were 0-8 at home. We won 2 games on the road. We beat, I think, New Orleans down to New Orleans. And we came back a week later, and we beat the Pittsburgh Steelers in Pittsburgh with a late field goal to win the game. So it was just, a weird scenario. We won 2 games in a row, lost all 8 at home, and it was awful, and it was terrible. But we knew we weren't good. And the quarterback wasn't good. And I looked around on our defense, and I said, I might be the 3rd best guy in the defense. We're in trouble. If I'm the 3rd best guy on this defense, I said, we're in trouble. And we were. Then I ended up having a catastrophic injury against Carolina in late November, ended my career, and boom. Then I went to the radio.
What was the most enjoyable season for you as a player? Was it when one of the seasons with the Packers, the Browns, or in Jacksonville?
I went to the playoffs for 6 straight years. So from 93, 94, 95 through 98, I was in the playoffs every single year. So those are enjoyable when you're winning games. But I have to say the most enjoyable was when we were 4-7 in Jacksonville in 1996. We won 5 straight games. Now, we didn't do it with style. It didn't look great, but we did just enough to win games, right? So you were learning how to win. I think we beat Baltimore in old Baltimore Stadium where the Baltimore Colts used to play, Metropolitan Stadium out there. We played in that old stadium out there before they built their new one, and we won 30-27 in overtime. Forced a key fumble late in the game. Could have been Kelvin Mack or somebody like that. Biner put the ball on the ground. We recovered. They drove a little bit. Backup quarterback Rob Johnson took over for Mark Brunell in that game because Mark got hurt, and we ended up finding a way to beat him. So we win that game. We come back and we beat, I think it was still the Houston Oilers at the time before they became the Tennessee Titans. We beat the Houston Oilers. So, great for us. We beat the Houston Oilers. Nice. There we go. Just found a way. Atlanta. Morton Anderson's going to kick a field goal in the final game of the year to beat us, to send us to 8-8, and we weren't going to make the playoffs. He stubs the ground and shanks the ball and shanks it in a different direction. And the next thing you know, we're in the playoffs. So that was a great year. Then we won against Buffalo up in Buffalo. Then we beat Denver in Denver and ended up playing the AFC Championship game against the New England Patriots. And nobody expected us to be there. We were competitive as hell. We were down 10-3, driving. We're in the red zone. Mark Brunell threw the ball in the really big play Clay's hand, and we ended up losing the game. 17-3, we lost that game because we gave the ball back to the offense at the 50. He threw the ball into, I think it was James Stewart's hands. He got hit, forced the fumble. Teddy Johnson picked it up, returned it for a touchdown. 17-3 game. Made it look worse than it was, but it was a very competitive game the whole time. But that 96 campaign, because we stunk, they were talking about firing Tom Coughlin, and we put a bunch of victories. We ended up winning 7 in a row, including the 2 playoff games. That was a real satisfying feeling because it felt like you built something up from us being a pretty crappy team. And we got rid of Andre Rison 8 games in. Andre Rison was doing his own thing. We traded him up to Green Bay. He ends up winning a Super Bowl because of it. But that's when Jimmy Smith started to take over opposite of Keenan McCardle. And that's when Jimmy Smith ended up becoming a superstar. So it works out sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Based on kind of what you were as kind of a younger athlete, did you always want to be kind of that professional football player? And when was the point in kind of your kind of footballing life that you actually believe that this is a realistic chance that I can make it to the NFL?
Right. But so I always wanted to play football, professional football. As a little kid, I wanted to play football, period. I was born in Germany. So my parents emigrated from Yugoslavia to Germany. They stayed there 4 years. They had my sister and I. So I came to the United States when I was 2 months old. Born in August, came here at the end of October. So came to the United States. My dad loved soccer. So he used to call me Little Beckenbauer all the time. But nobody played soccer by us. Nobody. Like we'd go to the park, bunch of immigrants from Europe, and we kick the soccer ball around, and the people would be yelling at us, you know? So I started watching football as a kid, and I understood a little bit. I watched it. I saw kind of the design and the reasons why they might have been doing something. So I loved the game, so I wanted to play football all the time. So from when I was a kid, I always wanted to play football. When's the first time I had an inkling? I knew if I was going to go to college, I had to get a scholarship. Mom and dad worked hard, but they didn't make a ton of money. So if I was going to go to college, I had to get a scholarship. And I had a younger brother who was 3 years younger than I in school-wise. So when I was a senior in high school, he was a freshman in high school. So he wanted to play football too. So we both played football. And when I got out of high school, I had one scholarship offer. I was all state. I was all conference. I was all of it. I was a pretty highly regarded kid coming out of high school, but I only had one scholarship offer, and that was the Eastern Illinois. So I went to Eastern Illinois and played about. My sophomore year, I was playing against a kid from Indiana State. He's a tackle, and people were looking at him in the NFL. And I played against him. I played defensive end at the time before I moved in to play defensive tackle. And it was a 4th and 1 play. And I come off the line of scrimmage, and I got up under his pads, and I pressed him back, and we ended up stopping him on the play. And there was a scout from the Washington Redskins in there. And he looked at the film. He goes, "Who's that kid?" And then he told him who I was, blah, blah, blah. He came out and he introduced him to me. And he looked at me and he says, "You're a pretty good player. I like what you did on that play. I like the way you played against them." Now, this kid ended up getting either drafted or he signed as a free agent down with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers after his senior year. So that's the first time I had a scout, somebody from the NFL kind of say, "Hey, I think you can play, kid," which was a great feeling. Then that next spring, I blew my knee to smithereens. I blew my knee out. And then it had to start all over again. And it did. I sat out from April, missed the football season in the fall, came back in the spring, was playing, and then was ready to play the next year. And then I was the defensive player of the year for a couple of years in a row, made a couple All-American teams. And then, boom, played in the blue-gray game. I went to the combine. I did some interviews with teams and traveled, but because of my knee injury, nobody was going to take the chance and draft me. So I ended up signing as a free agent down in Miami with the Dolphins, and that's how it all came to fruition. Got cut. They brought me back on the practice squad. Signed with Green Bay the next year. Got cut. They brought me back on the practice squad. Some poor sucker got hurt. They said, "Hey, we're going to activate you for the final 5 games." And then in 92, is when Holmgren came in. That's when I kind of established myself as a player. And then a little bit I established myself as a player. 93 is when I really solidified it. They brought Bill Moss into play. And in 93, Billy was having an Achilles problem. They gave me the start. And then we started playing some real solid defense and real good run defense. And that's when I knew I was going to be able to play in the league for an extended period of time. So it took a little bit of time. 2 years on the practice squad, 1 year kind of playing a little bit. 93 where I really kind of figured it all out and put it all together. So and then I played another 6 years after that.
That's always good. Is there any piece of advice you would give for defensive linemen currently in the NFL that maybe you see some guys doing wrong? Because I know pretty much every season you from looking at the draft, I always remember one, you always spoke about Aaron Donald before he came in.
Yeah.
And how you thought straight away that he was going to be a very, very good player. I always kind of listened to
crystal clear number 1 defensive line coming out of that draft.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and the reason why? Because he could use his hands, and he was a man in motion, and he had all the moves. He was utilizing the swim move. A lot of guys try to use power and overpower people. Well, he had to utilize his technique. And that's what separated him from everybody else. The technique that he was using when he was out there separated him from everybody. And he's a shorter player, but he played with tremendous leverage. Some guys have a tendency to peak. They want to look over. He's a guy that can feel things that are happening to him. He doesn't have to see what's happening to him. And if it's something I would tell the guys that are out there now, you've got to develop that feel. Almost to the point where you come off the ball, you close your eyes, and then you've got to feel what's happening. You know?
Yeah.
Like, okay, you got to see right at the beginning because you want to see everything that's happening. You can have some pre-snap reads that might let you it'll give you a knowledge of what maybe it's not going to be run, and maybe that you got a couple of guys sitting light, so they might be doing a little a pull action in front of you, which would always help you fight or send you in a decent direction or let you know don't overcommit one way because it could be going back the other way. But you've got to feel it. The feel has to develop, especially the interior defensive line. You've got to be able to feel. How many times do you see nose tackles just get run out of there? My biggest principle is don't go anywhere fast because they want to influence you to go running one direction and they're going to cut it right back behind you, pin your backside defensive end, give yourself a gap where either the linebacker or the safety, they're not going to be able to help no matter what because there's such a big gap there. So don't go anywhere fast. And the same way going left to right too fast, if you penetrate too far and you don't make the play, now you compromise the integrity of the defense behind you. So you got to be careful. Over penetration could be a bad thing. Now that's in football only. So over penetration could be a bad thing for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting, especially we look at it this year with the Bears without Eddie Goldman, who was kind of that key cog to that run defense. So how do you think some of the other players have kind of stepped up? I know we've had Bilal Nichols basically playing a load of different positions in kind of the defensive line. How well do you think he's kind of transitioned? Personally, I think he's a bit more of a pass rusher than the kind of prototypical nose tackle, but he's forced into that position this year. So do you think that the run defense has mainly just gotten a little bit worse this year because they don't have someone in the middle like Eddie Goldman, or is it to do with kind of the scheme they're kind of running at the moment under Chuck Pagano?
No, I don't think they've been able to replace Goldman. I don't think Nichols is that prototypical run-stopping nose tackle. He is more of that even front, go against the nickel and the dime, and it's kind of been the role that he's played and he's been able to flourish at, a pass-rushing guy playing in obvious pass-rushing situations. I don't think Jenkins, number 90, has been able to get in there and really replace Goldman either. I think the guy that substituted the best for guys across the line has been Urban, number 92. I think he's been able to step in and actually is a pretty productive player for the limited amount of reps that he has. But he may be one of those guys that's a perennial backup that really flourishes in a limited role. And if you ask him to play 80% of the plays, may not be as effective. So the best combination is Goldman and Hicks. That's your best combination. I think it's your most dominant combination that you have in the middle too. After that, when you have to put Nichols, Jenkins, or Urban in there, and that group has got to play in the interior, I think that's when you become compromised to the run. I think that's when they can go ahead and they can hit you. I don't think Max having the impact that he had when he came over in 2018. He just hasn't had it. And Quinn came in injured. I don't think Quinn's 100%. And at this point of the year, nobody's 100%, but you still got to find a way to be effective. I just don't think these guys are 100%. I think the last 5 to 6 games has started to take it out of them. But the productivity is just not there. It's not there. And if Nagy gets replaced, Pagano gets replaced, hopefully they come in here with a fresh set of ideas next year for the defense.
Yeah, it'd be very good. It's interesting because personally I've been listening to you guys on the radio for a while, and what made you choose kind of to transition from football to go into radio? Because you see a lot of kind of ex-players want to go into coaching in some capacity. Has that ever crossed your mind to get into that side of it, or was going into sports radio always something you wanted to do after your football career?
Well, I was either going to coach or I was going to work in broadcasting. And I started having a family in 96 and 98, and I didn't want my family. I saw a bunch of coaches getting hired and getting fired. And then I knew Duran and I knew Coach Blosh, and I looked at their litany of places that they had been over the course of time. And I didn't want to live a nomadic lifestyle. I didn't want to have to pick up every 2-3 years and go someplace. So that's when I decided maybe sports broadcasting. And in my early years, that's when sports radio started to come into play. New York had it, Chicago had it, maybe Miami had. Hank Goldberg had a show, or Joe Rose, those guys had a show. But 92, that's when the Score came to Chicago. And I said, hey, this could be something viable at the end of my career. So in 91, I started doing a radio show down in New Holstein, the New Holstein Supper Club in Altoona, Wisconsin. I was a practice squad guy. But I had a guy say, hey, why don't you come down and talk football with me? So from that, I had a guy tell me that I was pretty good at it. I should consider doing it for a living. I said, great, but I was still playing football, so I could afford to screw around a little bit with radio on a Monday night. Then I started doing a little bit of television. The post-game show, Mandarich was doing it, and that's when Tony in 92 got the headaches, and he had the post-concussion disorder. Not diagnosed at the time, but ultimately diagnosed, and he asked me if I would do his TV show for him. So I said, yeah. And then I started doing radio on Friday mornings. So it just all kind of built on to where I'd come back to Chicago during the summer, and I'd go on the Score with Dan McNeil. And then Danny Mac's like, hey, one day you should want to do this with me afterwards. I did games for Fox. I did 6 games for Fox. I went to NFL Europe and did some games. I did the Arena League for TNN with Eli Gold and Jill Arrington. So I was doing it. I was getting into it, and I liked it. And then I got the break in May of 2001 to do the radio show with Dan McNeil and Harry Tynowitz. And that's the beginning of radio, May 2001 until November of 2020 right now. That's how long I've been doing sports radio in the city of Chicago. And it started when I was still playing. And then I took a year off because the NFL was paying me, looking to get into radio and finding an avenue and a way to get in there. I finally found a way to get in there. And so that's what I decided to do. I still think about coaching every day. I still thinking about going back and maybe coaching one day. And I'm not too old. The knowledge is there, and that's what you have to have. The vision, the seeing, the understanding. I think I understand more why things fail sometimes than the people that are actually doing it. Because I was coached at an exceptional level by Greg Blush. And then I had coaches after that weren't as good as he was. And I could tell. But you can't say anything. You just go about your business. Maybe you say a couple friendly things just to get everybody moving in the right direction. But no, he was the best, and he trained me. And knowing that, knowing what I see now, and watching football, and watching defenses revolve, and looking at the different things that offenses are doing, if I had to go in and coach either the defensive line, I know I could do that, not a problem, or the offensive line. It's the 2 areas I know. Where I played and the people that played directly against me. That I know. I know what works. I know what doesn't work. So, and they made life for offensive linemen so easy nowadays. I can't believe you can do whatever you want to a defensive lineman and it's legal. It's
yeah.
But I'd be able to give them the tricks of the trade, some new stuff that they might want to think about. That's I consider it illegal, but they consider it legal now.
Yeah. What's it like when you're in a locker room, especially like you mentioned before under Greg, that you had exceptional coaching and then you come to maybe a later season when he's gone and somebody else is in and you know that he's just not doing as much as you feel like you could be getting out of the players. What's that like in a locker room when the guys know that they're not getting that high quality coaching that the team needs to be successful?
Well, usually what happens is one guy ends up leaving or another guy ends up leaving. Greg left to go to Indianapolis. Jerron left to go to Jacksonville to become the defensive coordinator down there. So everybody was getting their opportunities to do something. Ray Rhodes left because he couldn't stand Ron Wolf. Ray Rhodes left and went back to San Francisco after the 93 year. In 94, he was the defensive coordinator out in San Francisco. So, guys were leaving for certain. And then, Fritzy came in. My coach was Larry Brooks, the defensive back coach. I forget exactly who came in and coached the defensive backs. But, for me, I knew how I was prepared and why I was prepared. Now, I could still do it because I knew how I prepared. I still prepared the same way for every game. but I wasn't getting the same information from the D-line coach at the time. Not only that, but in-game communication and in-game adjustments were more difficult with a different coach. And I had to find a way to go ahead and still try to get the information that I needed to get from the coach that was there. But there's many times on the sidelines where I'm speaking a certain language, and it's the language of football, and he's not necessarily speaking that language. And he's asking me a question. I'm giving him the answer, the correct answer of what's happening on the field, and he's doubting what I'm telling him, and that was a problem. That was a problem. And then I had to point out, I go, this is where you asked me where the ball went. I told you where it went, and you didn't believe me. I said, when I'm telling you the information that I'm seeing and I'm feeling on the field, I said, you have to take it 100%. Upstairs, they don't see it. Okay? They may think they see it, but they didn't see it. I told you where it broke. That's where it broke, and you told me I was full of crap. I said, we got a problem. Because if you can't trust me, I can't trust you. So that's the way it works. And if a coach trusts a player, he'll want that player forever. Okay? It's when he can't trust the player that it becomes a problem. That's where that coaching, why players don't end up sticking around for a long period of time. They never develop trust with a coach. Coach has to be able to trust. He gives you the information. You are going to do that on the field. So that's the way that goes.
Is that the most important thing that you've seen in kind of a locker room, where trust between the coaches and the players, kind of more than anything, because that's who you get the most out of their players?
You have to have it. You have to have it. I've got to believe in the guy that's next to me and the guy that's next to me and the people that are behind me. I've got to believe in them. If you're a quarterback, you've got to believe your wide receiver is going to be where you're going to throw the ball. You have to. You also have to believe the coach is going to put you in the best situation to win a game. Yeah, you believe that against what they're going to bring against you, they're going to provide the protection necessary, or they're going to tell you, we don't have the protection here. The blitz is coming from this way. If you see it happening, anticipate it and buy yourself a little bit of time, but we're going right back where it's coming from. So, you're depending upon the coaches to give you the information you need to win. You trust that they're going to be able to make the calls, and you're trusting that the players are going to be where they're going to need to be, and they're going to do what they need to do.
Absolutely. To finish off our kind of conversation, I'm just going to ask, who do you think are the teams to look out for this season in the playoffs? Because look, with the expanded playoffs, we have a lot more teams to be looking at. We have all these wild cards coming in now. What are the teams that you expect that we'll see towards the end? We saw the Steelers lose their first game last week, where a lot of people would have put them as favorites because they were unbeaten. But look, is it very simple that it's hard to kind of pick past Pat Mahomes in Kansas City, or is there anybody else?
No, I'll tell you, teams that play hot at the end of the year sometimes become dangerous. Like the NFC East has been an absolute joke all year. The Giants, the Washington Redskins, the Dallas Cowboys. I don't know who's going to come out of there, whether it's going to be Washington or whether it's going to be New York. But if they start playing well down at the end of the year, where they were garbage, and these teams end up finishing, say, 7-3 in their last 10, and they're starting to look real good, they become dangerous teams. I think the AFC is much more dangerous than the NFC. If I had to do a power rankings, I would have probably 4 out of 5 of my teams from the AFC in those top 5 positions, with maybe New Orleans up there and with Green Bay coming in 6th. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I just think the AFC is better right now than the NFC. Whoever goes to the Super Bowl in the AFC is going to be my choice to win. I just think they're that much better than the NFC right now. I just believe that Pittsburgh, scheduling issues, they had this, that, they had excuses. They were looking for excuses. It's good for them to lose a game. That way the Dolphins can celebrate. Larry Zonka can campaign. He can go have a good time. But, yeah, I think the AFC much more dangerous. In the NFC, every once in a while I go to the class, You go to the class in a horse race, whenever you're going to look at it, go to the pedigree. I might go to the pedigree in the NFC. Okay. Tampa, New Orleans, NFC championship game. Tampa, New Orleans, Green Bay, 2 or 3 right there. I think of those 3 teams, I think one of them is going to get to the Super Bowl, and I think it's going to be absolute fodder for the AFC team. I think the AFC team is going to embarrass the NFC team in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's unfortunate the way it works out that way because I think for a while there we had a very competitive NFC while we expected the Patriots to make it every single season in the AFC. So I guess for there to be kind of those 4 or 5 teams this season in the AFC, at least that it's a bit interesting when it comes to the playoff because there's a lot of interesting matchups that can happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's very good. The last thing that I wanted to ask you was, what do you think was the most enjoyable game you've either been a part of or have seen, so have experienced?
I think for me it's easy because it was one of my best games ever. December 26, 1993, against the LA Raiders. They came to class. It was 0 degrees, day after Christmas. It was the birth of the Lambeau Leap. That's when Leroy Butler jumped up into the stands after he had scored a touchdown when Reggie flipped him the ball. I had 2.5 sacks. I had 9 tackles. The field was frozen. My choice of footwear was superior to whatever the Raiders put on their feet. And I had traction. I had all types of traction. And I could go wherever I wanted to go, whenever I wanted to go there. I was playing against Max Montoya, old veteran from the Cincinnati Bengals, Don Mosbar that had played at USC. Montoya went to USC too. Mosbar went to USC, was a big 6'7" guy. And then Steve Wisniewski was the young kid out of Penn State. And Wisniewski was tougher than nails, but for one reason or another, I always played well against them. So I had 2.5 sacks, 9 tackles. And the key was Mosbar's 6'7", I'm 6'2". I got in my stance. I could see right between his legs. Quarterback's hands were right there. Every time right before the snap, it was Hostetler at quarterback. Every time before the snap, he would raise his top hand. So it'd be hut, and then he'd go up, and he'd go hut. I'm like, my sweet heavens, look at this. The whole day, if you watch the film, December 26, 93, you watch the film, I'm getting off the ball like a jet plane. They're like, oh, my God, what reaction time. Take a look at the reflexes on that kid. My ass. I watched his hands. Every time his hands went up, I started moving forward, and I was gonna get somebody. I actually caused another sack and a fumble, but they called it an incomplete pass. I would have had 3.5 sacks that day. I didn't get the game ball. They ended up giving the game ball to the entire defense, which was crap.
I'm sure that pissed you off.
I got plenty of them, so it's not a problem. But when you have your best game, you don't get a game ball. You got to ask yourself what the hell's going on. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we end, just make sure everybody like, subscribe, and I just want to say a big thank you to Jurk for joining me today. It's been a great chat. Some really interesting stories as well. So I just want to thank you for joining me today, Jurko.
I got one question for you.
Yeah.
What happened to Dele Alli?
I don't know. I think
what happened to him? He was playing on the English team in 2018. He was the starter, one of the first 11, and all of a sudden now he can't even make the starting lineup under Jose Mourinho, the special one.
Yeah. I think it comes down to coaching, that his style fit what Pochettino was doing, and he was a key cog for him. But then it seems like after that World Cup, either he just didn't, maybe he changed his game, maybe he wasn't as committed, or something happened where he was playing every single game for Tottenham, every game for England, and then suddenly he's completely out. And it just seems like he hasn't been able to get through in the Mourinho teams. And probably at this point, it's like we said before, if you don't have trust in the coach and the coach doesn't have trust in you, you probably need to move on. And I think that's where he's probably at right now.
Okay, and my other thing is, when Croatia played England in the semifinals of the 2018 World Cup, you know, the song was "It's Coming Home, It's Coming Home."
Yeah.
As a Croatian, I was singing "You're Going Home, You're Going Home."
No, it was great. I was
Sir Mario. Oh, I love it.
Yeah, Croatia were really good that year. It's disappointing that a lot of their better players now are getting a little bit older, but they were a really, really fascinating team to watch, especially in that World Cup. And I think they completely deserved to where they got. And look, France were an excellent team, but they gave them a good fight in the final.
Yeah, 4-2. You know, at least we scored a couple of goals, and we made Hugo Lloris look like a buffoon when he tried to move the ball away from Mandzukic, who ended up scoring on that play. Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate you having me, and certainly anytime you guys want to chat, I'm always available.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me today, Jurko, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, guys, take care.